deafening clap of thunder follows a brilliant flash of lightning as sheets of rain pour down on the Rolling Hills nursing home. The home is in a small, quiet community 30 minutes outside of Portland, Oregon. The storm is Mother Nature's last blast on this early October Saturday to usher in the colder, windier days of fall. There is another streak of lightning and clash of thunder as a new car pulls into the parking lot. Rolling Hills is a typical nursing home where one might find patients in wheelchairs along corridor walls, many alone and oblivious. One might see a big, white companion dog roaming the halls looking to be petted or scratched with no offers from anyone. The place has a strong, antiseptic smell to it, evidence of constant cleaning to stay one step ahead of any bacterial infection that would spread like wildfire here. A white, middle-aged brunette with thin-framed glasses and little makeup sits behind the reception desk. She has a pleasant look about her as she reviews papers, checking off items here and there. She listens to a nearby radio. A man's excited voice announces the latest news over the radio.
And now, the latest on the October surprise of the 2036 presidential election.
More of this garbage.
President Dave Hampton issued a statement this morning saying there is no truth whatsoever to claims his father, the late Sean Hampton, was a former U.S. spy in the 1960s, turned by the Soviet Union to become a double agent. President Hampton went on to say his father served his country with distinction, and these allegations are a slander against a man who is no longer alive to defend himself.
My father died 5 years ago. Let him rest in peace.
Amen.
We have just received word that President Hampton will be holding a press conference in 2 hours. We will bring you live coverage.
The receptionist turns off the radio as she sees a man outside approaching the entrance. She continues to look at the radio in disgust as the man approaches the desk.
Am I disturbing you?
Oh no, I was just listening to the latest news on the radio.
Ah, you're following the big story too.
Hard to avoid. It's everywhere. They'll stop at nothing to sling mud.
Yeah, I was listening on the way here. You must be Barbara's replacement.
She retired last week.
Good for her. She put in a lot of years here.
The man extends his hand to the receptionist. The two shake hands.
I'm here to see Scott Miller. I'm his grandson, Dan.
Pleased to meet you. My name is Susan. Your grandfather doesn't get any other visitors.
Grandfather-in-law, actually. My wife Maggie is the granddaughter by blood. Sadly, aside from us and our kids, there is no family left. Maggie's parents died in a car accident 20 years ago.
I am so sorry.
Thanks. Once he no longer recognized anyone, it became too much for Maggie. Corey is 10, Jessica is 12, too young to really understand. No point, really.
Dan looks down. Susan pats his arm gently.
It's okay. We get a lot of that here. Scott is 100. Pretty impressive.
Dan looks up, his expression brighter.
Yes, it is. He's had a good long life, thank you. Well, I suppose I'd better go see him. Still room 122?
Yes, 122.
Thanks again.
Scott's room is a typical nursing home room with hospital bed, TV, and pictures of Scott's late wife and Dan's family. Scott lays on the bed, a frail, wrinkled old man with white hair and pale skin. He stares straight up at the ceiling, then leans in close to Scott and speaks.
Hi, Granddad.
There is no reaction at all from Scott, no sign of any recognition.
I've come to see how you are getting along, and visit for a while.
Again, no reaction, no sign of recognition. Dan soldiers on.
The kids are doing well in school. Basketball will be starting soon. Corey loves basketball, remember?
Again, no reaction from Scott.
Jessica has started violin lessons. That is a difficult instrument to master. Maggie and I think she's up to it.
The complete lack of reaction and recognition continues from Scott.
Corey's birthday is coming up soon, remember?
Again, no reaction. It is obvious this visit is going to be just like all of the others. 30 minutes later, Dan is sitting in the recliner reading news on his phone to Scott. He looks up from the phone and over to Scott from time to time, searching for any sign of recognition, activity, anything. Nothing. An hour later, Dan is pacing up and down the left side of the bed. He stops at the head of the bed to look at Scott. Nothing. Sighing again, he picks up the TV remote and turns on the TV, muting it. He sits in the recliner again and begins to watch the silent TV. 15 minutes later, Dan is still sitting in the recliner watching the TV while thinking of something to say that might jog Scott's memory.
Remember that time we went fishing and I was trying so hard to reel in that big one that I fell out of the boat?
But Scott continues to be still and silent. Dan sighs heavily.
Running out of things to say here, Granddad. It may be about time for me to go.
Something on the TV catches Dan's eye. He turns to look at it.
Oh, breaking news. May as well catch up on the score.
Dan uses the remote to unmute the TV just as a news anchor begins to speak.
We now go live to President Hampton at the White House press room.
Good afternoon. I would like to begin by making a statement. You have all heard the latest statement from the CIA. In response to the ridiculous allegations that my late father was a U.S. spy turned double agent by the former Soviet Union, a thorough review of records has been conducted. No evidence whatsoever was found that this fake news you people put out has any merit at all.
Is it possible the investigation's conclusions are wrong?
Again, you heard the announcement. The investigation was very thorough. It involved many agents, countless hours, and a large counterintelligence operation.
What about these recent reports of another spy who discovered Mr. Hampton was a double agent?
Did any of you people listen to what I just said? My father was not a double agent. There was no other spy.
There has been more than one source on this, Mr. President. There was this other agent. Sources say his code name was Willow.
I have no idea what you're talking about. It's fake news. They are trying to discredit my campaign.
But Dan is no longer listening. He is staring intently at Scott. Scott slowly raises his weak right hand and points it at the TV screen. Stunned, Dan continues to stare as Scott's hand falls back to the bed. Dan looks back at the TV and then back at Scott. Dan turns off the TV, stands, steps up to the side of the bed, and leans in close to Scott's ear.
Granddad, was that you?
Willow.
Scott slowly raises his left hand and points a finger at the picture of his late wife for a brief moment before his hand falls back to the bed as if he has used up all of his remaining strength. Dan moves to the picture and picks it up. He turns it in his hand, examining it. Here he moves the picture from the picture frame, revealing a brown envelope. He reaches into the envelope and pulls out a single, folded piece of paper. He unfolds the paper and takes a few moments to read it. Dan looks at Scott, his expression hard. Dan is a different person now.
Well, what do you know? A signed confession from Sean Hampton. This was your ticket out of the Soviet Union, your insurance policy, and you kept it hidden all these years.
Dan folds the piece of paper and puts it in his pocket. He takes a phone from his pocket. It is a phone he has not used before. He dials a number. After a moment, he speaks into the phone with pride and confidence.
I have the evidence, Mr. President.
A few moments pass as Dan listens to the phone. Dan looks down at Scott with regret as he speaks into the phone.
Yes, Mr. President.
Dan looks down at Scott again as he puts the phone back in his pocket. Here he moves a syringe from another pocket. He inserts the needle into Scott's left arm. Scott is too weak and frail to resist. A blue liquid begins to flow from the syringe into Scott's arm.
Sorry about this, Pops. You know how it is. Can't leave any loose ends.
Dan looks on stoically as Scott tries to move his right hand to his left arm slowly and weakly in an attempt to stop Dan, but it only moves a few inches before falling back to the bed. Once the syringe is empty, Dan removes it from Scott's arm and puts it back into his pocket.
Don't worry, old man. There won't be any pain. It will be just like going to sleep, only you'll never wake up.
Scott's breathing begins to slow. Dan sighs.
Wish you'd coughed up sooner, old-timer. I'm not surprised, though. Dan and Maggie wouldn't talk either. Couldn't even beat it out of them. Maybe you never told them. But if you'd spilled the beans earlier with me, they might still be alive, and I would have saved myself months of work on the grandson routine.
Scott's breathing slows more. The imposter looks at the picture of Dan's family and then looks back down at Scott. Dan sighs and speaks again with true regret in his voice.
All that grief for nothing.
Scott is now barely breathing. The imposter speaks one last time.
I hope you find peace on the other side, you old spook. There sure isn't much of that here.
The imposter walks to the door. He takes one last look back at Scott. He glances toward the window, noting the rain has stopped. Then he turns, opens the door, and leaves the room as Scott Miller takes his very last breath and passes away.